The shuttle's engines hummed as it descended through the thick clouds of Kepler 438c. Kehoe pressed his face against the small window, watching the endless green forest spread out below them like a living carpet. Next to him, Da-Un bounced in, her seat with excitement, her notebook already filled with questions about the plant life they would study. "First time on an alien world?" asked Crix, the mantis-like student sitting across from them. His compound eyes glittered with amusement. "Yes," Dae-Yun replied, her voice filled with wonder. "I've dreamed about this since I was little." Professor Veltar stood at the front of the shuttle, his blue skin shimmering as he addressed the class. The tall alien had taught xenobiology for over 200 years, and his reputation reached across the galaxy. Students from 7 different worlds sat in the cramped shuttle, all eager to learn from the famous professor. "This forest moon contains over 3,000 documented plant species," Veltar announced, his voice carrying easily over the engine noise. "Our mission is simple. We will spend 5 days cataloging new specimens and studying their interactions. The preliminary surveys show a peaceful ecosystem with no dangerous predators." Kehoe frowned at those words. As an engineering student, he had learned to question assumptions. "Professor, what kind of surveys were done?" Veltar's large eyes fixed on the human student. "Orbital scans, atmospheric analysis, and automated probe data, all standard procedures." "But no ground teams?" Kehoe pressed. "Unnecessary," the professor replied with a wave of his long fingers. "We have complete data on this world." The shuttle touched down in a clearing surrounded by towering trees. The moment the doors opened, sweet air filled the cabin. Da-Un gasped at the beauty of their surroundings. Massive trees stretched up toward the sky, their trunks as wide as buildings. Colorful flowers bloomed everywhere, and the air hummed with the sound of insects. "It's like a fairy tale," whispered Hollow Song, the gaseous student whose voice echoed strangely in the thick air. Boulder, the rock-like student, rumbled his agreement. "Very peaceful, very safe." The students unpacked their equipment while Professor Veltar set up the main camp. He placed their tents in a neat circle around a central fire pit, just like the textbooks recommended. Kehoe noticed that the professor chose their location based on convenience rather than security. The camp sat in a low area surrounded by thick trees that could hide anything. "Professor," Kehoe said, approaching the tall alien, "shouldn't we set up some kind of perimeter? Maybe post a watch schedule?" Veltar laughed, the sound like wind, chimes in a breeze. "My dear human, this is not a military operation. We are scientists conducting research. The data shows no threats." "But we're in unknown territory," Kehoe insisted. "Basic safety protocols recommend—" "Basic human paranoia," interrupted Veltar. "Your species sees danger everywhere because of your violent evolution. Try to think like a civilized being." Da-Yun looked up from unpacking her equipment. She had heard the conversation and felt embarrassed by her fellow humans' concerns. The other students were already laughing and exploring the beautiful forest. Maybe Kehoe was being too worried. "The data is clear," Veltar continued. "This world has no large predators. The biggest animals are small herbivores about the size of your Earth rabbits. We are perfectly safe." As if to prove his point, a small creature hopped into their clearing. It looked like a cross between a rabbit and a lizard, with soft fur and gentle eyes. The alien students cooed with delight as it approached their camp without fear. "See?" Veltar said triumphantly. "Even the local animals know this is a safe place." The first day passed wonderfully. The students spread out through the nearby forest, collecting samples and taking notes. Da-Yun discovered several new types of flowering plants, each more beautiful than the last. The alien students worked in groups, chatting and laughing as they gathered specimens. Kehoe tried to focus on his assigned task of soil analysis, but he found himself constantly looking around. Something felt wrong, though he couldn't explain what. The forest seemed too quiet in some places and too noisy in others. He noticed that certain areas had no animal sounds at all, as if the creatures avoided those spots. When he mentioned this to Crix, the mantis student just shrugged. "Perhaps they are sleeping areas," he suggested. "Not all creatures are active during the day." By evening, they had collected dozens of samples. Professor Veltar was pleased with their progress and announced that they were ahead of schedule. The students gathered around the fire pit as the alien sun set, sharing stories and comparing their findings. "Tomorrow we will venture deeper into the forest," Veltar announced. "The orbital data shows even more interesting specimens further from the landing site." "How far are we going?" Kehoe asked. "Several kilometers," the professor replied. "Do not worry. We have tracking devices and communication equipment. Nothing can go wrong." As the night grew darker, strange sounds echoed through the forest. Most of the students ignored them, assuming they were just normal forest noises. But Kehoe found himself unable to sleep. He lay in his tent, listening to the sounds beyond their camp. There were footsteps, heavy ones, moving in patterns that seemed too organized to be random. And something else that made his skin crawl. The sound of breathing that was too deep, too measured to belong to any small herbivore. Da-Un noticed his restlessness. "Can't sleep," she whispered from her nearby tent. "Something's not right," Kehoe replied quietly. "Those sounds, they don't match what the professor described." "Maybe you're just not used to alien forests," Da-Yun suggested, though she sounded uncertain. Around midnight, the sounds stopped completely. The forest became so quiet that Kehoe could hear his own heartbeat. That silence scared him more than any noise. In his engineering classes, he had learned that sudden changes in patterns usually meant something was wrong. He unzipped his tent and peered outside. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, casting strange shadows between the trees. For a moment, he thought he saw something large moving just beyond the light. But when he looked again, there was nothing. "Professor Veltar," he whispered toward the larger tent where their instructor slept. No response. Either the professor was a heavy sleeper, or he was choosing to ignore the human's concerns. Kehoe settled back into his sleeping bag, but sleep wouldn't come. Every instinct his species had developed over millions of years was telling him that they were being watched. Somewhere in the darkness beyond their small camp, something was studying them with the same interest they had shown, the local plants. As dawn broke over the forest moon, Kehoe emerged from his tent feeling tired and worried. The other students seemed refreshed and eager for another day of exploration. Only Da-Un noticed the dark circles under his eyes. "Bad night?" she asked. "You could say that," Kehoe replied, scanning the tree line. In the morning light, everything looked peaceful again. But he couldn't shake the feeling that their first day had been nothing more than a test. Something had been watching them, learning their habits, and now it knew exactly where to find them. The second day started with Professor Veltar announcing their plan to explore deeper into the forest. The students packed their equipment and followed him along what seemed to be an animal trail. Kehoe walked at the back of the group, his eyes constantly moving from tree to tree. "You look like you expect monsters to jump out at any moment," Crix commented, his antennae twitching with amusement. "Maybe I do," Kehoe replied, not taking his attention away from their surroundings. The trail led them through areas of the forest that felt different from their camp. Here, the trees grew closer together, creating deep shadows even in the midday light. The happy chatter of the students gradually died down as they walked deeper into the gloom. Dayun noticed it first, the silence. "Where are all the animals?" she asked, looking around. "Yesterday we saw dozens of those rabbit lizard creatures. Today I haven't seen a single one." Professor Veltar waved his hand dismissively. "Animal populations vary by location. This is perfectly normal." But Kehoe had stopped walking entirely. He stood next to a massive tree trunk, staring at something that made his blood run cold. Deep gouges marked the bark, starting about 8 feet from the ground and extending up another 4 feet. They were clearly claw marks, but they were huge, each one as long as his hand. "Professor," Kehoe called out, his voice tight with concern, "you need to see this." The group gathered around the damaged tree. Even the alien students looked worried now. The marks were fresh, probably made within the last few days. Whatever had made them was big, powerful, and had very sharp claws. "Probably an herbivore," Veltar said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Many plant-eating animals sharpen their claws on trees." "At 8 feet high?" Kehoe asked. "What kind of herbivore is that tall?" Perhaps it was stretching, the professor suggested weakly. Kehoe examined the marks more closely. His engineering training had taught him to analyze physical evidence carefully. These weren't random scratches. They showed a deliberate pattern, as if the creature had been marking territory. Even more disturbing, the claw marks were perfectly parallel, suggesting the creature had excellent control over its movements. "There are more over here," Daun called from another tree about 50 meters away. The group spread out and found similar marks on dozens of trees throughout the area, all at the same height, all showing the same deliberate pattern. Kehoe began mapping their locations in his notebook and realized they formed a rough circle around a central area. "It's territorial marking," he announced to the group. "Something lives here, and it's warning other creatures to stay away." "Nonsense," Professor Veltar snapped, but his blue skin had turned a pale shade that the students had never seen before. "The data clearly shows no large predators on this world." While the others argued, Daun had wandered toward the center of the marked territory. Her scream brought everyone running. She stood frozen, staring down at something on the forest floor. Scattered among the fallen leaves were bones. Lots of bones. They belonged to various animals. But what made Daun scream were the larger pieces, skull fragments and rib bones that definitely hadn't come from rabbit-sized creatures. Kehoe knelt beside the bone pile, trying to keep his hand steady as he examined the remains. The bones showed clear bite marks, and some had been cracked open as if something had been extracting the marrow. Most disturbing of all, several of the skulls showed evidence of intelligence, tools marks where someone or something had deliberately broken them open. "These aren't random kills," Kehoe said quietly. "Look at how the bones are arranged. They've been sorted by size and type. Whatever did this is smart enough to organize its food." Hollow Song's gaseous form flickered with nervousness. "Perhaps we should return to camp now." "Excellent idea," Boulder rumbled, his rocky surface shifting anxiously. but Professor Veltar refused to admit there might be danger. We came here to do research, not to run away from animal bones. Many creatures collect and arrange objects. It means nothing. Professor, look at this, Da-Un said, holding up something that made Kehoe's heart skip a beat. It was a piece of metal. Clearly artificial. Clearly not from any known animal. The metal was twisted and marked with the same claw patterns they had seen on the trees. That's from a survey probe, Kehoe realized. One of the automated scouts they sent before we arrived. The group fell silent as the implication hit them. Whatever lived in this forest hadn't just killed animals. It had destroyed advanced technology, and it had been smart enough to bring the pieces back to its territory like trophies. We need to leave, Kehoe said firmly. Right now. Absolutely not, Professor Veltar declared, though his voice shook slightly. We have work to do. A few bones and some damaged equipment prove nothing. They prove we're in serious danger, Kehoe shot back. This thing, whatever it is, has been watching the survey probes. It knows about us. It's been preparing. Preparing for what? Crix asked nervously. Kehoe looked around at the claw marks, the organized bone pile, and the destroyed probe pieces. For hunting us. The argument that followed was intense. Kehoe and Da-Un insisted they should return to camp immediately and call for evacuation. The alien students were split between fear and loyalty to their professor. Professor Veltar became increasingly angry, accusing the humans of being cowards and refusing to consider the evidence. Your species sees predators everywhere because you evolved as prey animals, he declared. Try to think rationally instead of reacting with primitive fear. My species survived because we paid attention to warning signs, Kehoe replied coldly. Something you clearly don't know how to do. As they argued, none of them noticed the subtle sounds around them. The forest had gone completely silent again, just as it had the night before. No birds, no insects, no small animals moving through. The underbrush. Even the wind seemed to have stopped blowing. Da-Un was the first to realize they were no longer alone. She grabbed Kehoe's arm and pointed toward a cluster of trees about 100 meters away. Something large moved in the shadows between the trunks. It was there for just a moment before disappearing, but it was clearly much bigger than any rabbit lizard. Did you see that? She whispered. Kehoe nodded, his mouth suddenly dry. We're being watched. He tried to get the professor's attention, but Veltar was too busy lecturing about scientific methodology to listen. The other students had noticed the sudden silence, though, and they huddled closer together. Professor, Hollow Song said urgently, something is wrong. The forest has gone quiet. Finally, Veltar stopped talking and listened. The absolute silence was unmistakable now. Even he couldn't ignore it. Perhaps we should return to camp, he admitted reluctantly. We can continue our research tomorrow. But as they turned to leave, Kehoe realized they had a problem. The trail they had followed into this area was gone. Not damaged or blocked, completely gone, as if it had never existed. The forest floor showed no sign of their passage, and every direction looked exactly the same. Which way did we come from? Da-Un asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kehoe pulled out his compass and checked their position. According to his instruments, they should be able to see their landing, sight from here. But all he could see were trees stretching in every direction. I think, he said slowly, we're being herded. The walk back to camp took 3 hours instead of the 1 hour it should have taken. Every trail seemed to lead them in circles, and Kehoe's compass readings made no sense. Worse, They kept finding more claw marks on trees, always fresh, always, at exactly the same height. "It's playing with us," Kehoe muttered to Da-Un as they finally stumbled into their camp clearing. "Whatever it is, it's smart enough to confuse our sense of direction." Professor Veltar was exhausted and irritated when they finally reached the tents. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, and his blue skin had a sickly pale tint. "Clearly the magnetic field of this moon affects compass readings," he announced to the group. "Tomorrow we will use different navigation methods." "Tomorrow we should be on a transport off this world," Kehoe said firmly. "Professor, we found clear evidence of a large intelligent predator. The bones, the probe wreckage, the territorial markings. We need to evacuate immediately." "Absolutely not," Veltar snapped. "We have a research mission to complete. I will not allow human cowardice to ruin this expedition." "It's not cowardice," Da-Un protested. "It's common sense. Something dangerous lives in this forest, and it knows we're here." The professor's large eyes narrowed as he looked at the two human students. "Since arriving on this world, you have done nothing but spread fear and paranoia among the other students. Your primitive instincts are interfering with legitimate scientific work." Kehoe felt his temper rising. "Our primitive instincts might be the only thing keeping us alive. You're so focused on your data that you can't see the obvious danger signs." "Danger signs?" Veltar's voice rose to a shrill pitch. "I see animal scratches on trees and some old bones. You see monsters lurking behind every shadow. This is exactly why humans were the last species admitted to the Galactic Academic Consortium." The insult hit its mark, and Kehoe stepped forward, angrily. "At least humans know how to admit when they're wrong. You'd rather let students die than damage your academic reputation." "That's enough," Veltar shouted. "I am tired of your constant negativity and fear-mongering. If you are so terrified of this peaceful forest, perhaps field research is not suitable for your species." The other students watched in shock as the argument escalated. They had never seen their respected professor lose his temper like this. Crix's antennae twitched nervously, while Boulder's rocky surface rumbled with distress. "Fine," Kehoe said coldly. "Call for an evacuation transport, all of us, right now." "No," Veltar replied with icy calm. "I will call for a transport, for the humans only. The rest of us will continue our important work." Da-Un stared at the professor in disbelief. "You can't abandon us here." "I am not abandoning you," Veltar said smoothly. "I am removing a disruptive influence from my expedition. The transport will arrive in 2 hours. He pulled out his communication device and contacted the orbital station. Kehoe and Da-Un could only listen as their professor arranged for their immediate removal from the research team. The other students looked uncomfortable but said nothing. To protest. "Pack your personal belongings only," Veltar instructed after ending the call. "Your research materials will remain here for students who appreciate the value of scientific discovery." The next 2 hours passed in tense silence. Kehoe and Da-Un packed their few personal items, while the professor and other students prepared for continued research. No one spoke to the humans except for brief, awkward goodbyes. When the transport shuttle arrived, Kehoe made one last attempt to reason with the professor. "Veltar, please reconsider. I'm begging you. Those claw marks, the bone pile, the way we got lost. These aren't coincidences. Something is hunting you." "Goodbye, Kehoe," the professor replied without looking at him. "Perhaps next semester you can find a nice, safe research project that doesn't challenge your species' limitations." Kehoe and Da-Yun climbed aboard the small shuttle, which was designed for rapid personnel transfers rather than passenger comfort. The pilot, a bored-looking alien, seemed annoyed at having to make an unscheduled trip. "Wait!" called a voice from behind them. Crix came running toward the shuttle, his insect legs moving frantically. "Take me with you." "There's no room," the pilot said. "This shuttle is rated for 2 passengers maximum." "Please," Crix begged, looking back at the forest with obvious fear. "Something is wrong here. I can sense it." Behind Crix, Hollowsong and Boulder approached the shuttle. The gaseous student's form flickered with anxiety, while the rock creature's surface showed stress fractures. "We want to leave too," Hollowsong whispered. "The forest feels different now. Dangerous." The pilot checked. His passenger manifest. "I can take one more if someone sits on the floor. But that's it." Crix immediately scrambled aboard before anyone could object. Hollowsong and Boulder watched sadly as the shuttle doors closed, leaving them behind with Professor Veltar. As the shuttle lifted off, Kehoe pressed his face to the small window. Below them, the forest spread out like a dark green ocean. From this height, he could see patterns in the tree growth that hadn't been visible from the ground. Certain areas were completely bare of large trees, forming rough circles throughout. The forest. Hunting territories, he realized with a chill. "Look," Da-Un said, pointing to another section of forest visible through the opposite window. Smoke. Kehoe looked where she indicated and saw thin columns of smoke rising from several locations. "Campfires," he said. "There are other research teams down there." The pilot nodded. 3 other expeditions are currently active on this moon, all doing botanical surveys like your group." "They're all in danger," Kehoe said urgently. "We need to warn them." "Warn them about what?" the pilot asked skeptically. "Your professor filed a report saying you humans were having psychological problems related to an unfamiliar environment." Kehoe felt helpless fury building in his chest. Even now, after everything they had seen, no one would believe them. "Can you at least check on them? Make sure they're safe?" "Not my job," the pilot replied. "I transport people and cargo, nothing else." As they reached orbit, Kehoe took one last look at the forest moon. Somewhere down there, Professor Veltar and his remaining students were setting up camp for another night. Somewhere in that same forest, something large and intelligent was watching them, learning their patterns, planning its attack. "We have to do something," Da-Un said quietly. "We can't just leave them." Crix nodded vigorously. "The professor was wrong. I felt it too. The sense of being watched, being hunted. My species has very good instincts for predators." Kehoe stared. Out at the moon's surface, his mind racing. The professor had called him primitive and cowardly, but Kehoe knew the truth. Humans had survived on a dangerous world by paying attention to warning signs and protecting each other. Now other beings were in danger, and every human instinct he possessed was screaming at him to help them. "When we reach the orbital station," he said slowly, "I'm going to file a formal complaint, and I'm going to keep filing complaints until someone listens." "What if no one believes us?" Da-Un asked. Kehoe's jaw tightened with determination. "Then we'll find another way to help them. That's what humans do." The orbital station's administrator barely looked up when Kehoe burst into his office 3 hours later. The slug-like alien continued reviewing reports on his desk screen, while Kehoe tried to explain the danger facing the research teams below. "Professor, Veltar filed a comprehensive report," the administrator said in a bored tone. He stated that the human student suffered anxiety reactions due to unfamiliar environmental conditions. This is not uncommon among newer species. He's wrong, Kehoe insisted. There's a dangerous predator down there. I have evidence, photos, of claw marks, bone piles, destroyed equipment. Photos can be misinterpreted, the administrator replied without interest. Professor Veltar has over 2 centuries of field experience. I trust his judgment over that of a first-year human student. Da-Un tried a different approach. At least send a check-in message. Ask if they're safe. Standard protocol requires check-ins every 72 hours, the administrator said. The next scheduled contact is tomorrow evening. That might be too late, Kehoe said desperately. Young human, I understand your species has difficulty adapting to new environments. Perhaps you should consider switching to theoretical studies rather than field work. Kehoe left the office furious and frustrated. No one would listen to them because they were human, because they were students, because everyone believed Professor Veltar's reputation over their evidence. What now? Da-Un asked as they walked through the station's corridors. Now we go back, Kehoe said simply. Crix, who had been listening to their conversation, stopped walking. Go back? How? The administrator won't authorize another transport. Then we find an unauthorized one, Kehoe replied. There are cargo ships, maintenance shuttles, emergency vehicles. Something that can get us back to the surface. That's illegal, Da-Un protested. We could be arrested. Kehoe turned to face his fellow human. Da-Un, do you really think Professor Veltar and the others will survive another night down there? Da-Un thought about the claw marks on the trees, the organized bone pile, the way they had been herded through the forest. Her shoulders slumped with resignation. No, I don't think they will. Then we don't have a choice. It took 6 hours of searching, but Kehoe finally found what he needed. An automated cargo shuttle was scheduled to deliver supplies to a mining operation on the far side of the moon. The flight path would take it directly over the forest where the research teams were camped. The shuttle's AI pilot was designed to prevent unauthorized passengers, but Kehoe's engineering training included basic computer systems. He spent 2 hours studying the shuttle's programming before finding a way to override the passenger detection systems. This is insane, Crix muttered as they climbed into the cargo hold. If we're caught, we'll be expelled from the university. If we don't try, our friends will be dead, Kehoe replied, checking his improvised equipment pack. He had managed to gather rope, emergency flares, a portable radio, and basic tools from the station's maintenance supplies. The shuttle launched at dawn, following its programmed route toward the mining facility. Kehoe had calculated that they would pass over the research area in approximately 40 minutes. That gave him enough time to prepare for what came next. Prepare for what? Da-Un asked when he explained his plan. For jumping out of a moving spacecraft, Kehoe said calmly. That's suicide, Crix protested, his antennae waving frantically. No, that's skydiving, Kehoe corrected. Humans do it for fun. The cargo shuttle has emergency parachutes for exactly this kind of situation. Da-Un stared at him in horror. You want us to parachute into a forest full of monsters? I want us to save our friends before those monsters kill them, Kehoe replied. The question is whether you're coming with me or not. There was a long silence in the cargo hold as the shuttle flew through the morning sky. Finally, Da-Un sighed and reached for one of the emergency parachutes. I must be as crazy as you are. Crix hesitated longer, but eventually joined them. My species believes in honoring debts, he said. You tried to save me yesterday. Now, I will try to save the others." When the shuttle passed over the forest research area, Kehoe manually opened the cargo doors. The wind rushing through the hold was deafening, and the forest below looked like a solid wall of green. "Remember," Kehoe shouted over the noise, "aim for the clearing near Professor Veltar's camp. Stay together as much as possible. If you land in the trees, use the rope to climb down safely." "What if the monsters find us first?" Crix asked. Kehoe checked his equipment one more time. "Then we fight them. That's what humans do best." The jump was terrifying. One moment they were standing in the safety of the cargo hold. The next, they were falling through empty air at tremendous speed. Kehoe had never actually skydived before, but he had studied the theory in engineering class. Theory, it turned out, was very different from reality. The parachutes opened with violent jerks that nearly knocked the wind out of them. Then they were floating peacefully above the forest canopy, watching the ground slowly rise to meet them. Kehoe could see their target clearing about half a kilometer away, along with the smoke from several campfires. Da-Un landed first, coming down hard in a small meadow near the edge of the forest. Kehoe touched down nearby, rolling to absorb. The impact just like the training manuals recommended. Crix landed in a tree and had to use the rope to reach the ground safely. "Everyone okay?" Kehoe asked as they gathered their equipment. "Bruised but functional," Da-Un replied, checking herself. "For injuries. My pride is damaged more than my body," Crix added, brushing leaves from his carapace. Kehoe pulled out his compass and checked their position. The sun was higher now, which meant they had been traveling for hours. Professor Veltar's camp should be about 2 kilometers through the forest. "We need to move fast," he said. "The longer we stay in the open, the more likely we are to be detected." They had walked for only 10 minutes when Da-Un grabbed Kehoe's arm. "Listen," she whispered. In the distance, they could hear voices calling out. Human voices, alien voices, all shouting in panic and fear. The sounds echoed through the forest, making it impossible to determine exactly where they were coming from. "They're being attacked," Kehoe realized. "Right now." He broke into a run, crashing through the underbrush toward the sounds of distress. Behind him, Da-Un and Crix struggled to keep up. The voices were getting louder now, more desperate. Then suddenly, the forest fell silent. Kehoe stopped running and held up his hand for the others to halt. The absolute quiet was more terrifying than any scream. In the distance, smoke still rose from the campfires, but no voices called out anymore. "Are we too late?" Da-Un whispered. Kehoe looked around at the peaceful forest, listening for any sign of life from their friends. All he could hear was his own heartbeat and the quiet breathing of his companions. "I don't know," he admitted, "but we're going to find out." Kehoe crept through the forest with Da-Un and Crix close behind him. The silence was absolute now, broken only by the soft sound of their footsteps on fallen leaves. As they approached the area where Professor Veltar's camp should be, Kehoe raised his hand to signal a halt. Through the trees ahead, he could see the remains of their camp. The tents were still standing, but something was wrong. The campfire had burned down to cold ashes, and equipment was scattered across the clearing as if dropped in haste. "Where is everyone?" Da-Un whispered. Kehoe studied the scene carefully. There were no signs of violence, no blood or torn fabric, but there were also no people. Professor Veltar, Hollowsong, and Boulder had simply vanished. "Look at the ground," he said quietly. The dirt around the camp showed multiple sets of tracks. Some belonged to the missing students, but others were much larger. The big tracks, showed claw marks at the front of each footpad, and they were deep, enough to suggest something very heavy had made them. 6 sets of tracks, Kehoe counted, all leading away from camp in different directions. "They've been taken," Crix said, his voice barely audible. Kehoe nodded grimly. "Split up and herded. Away. Classic predator behavior." Da-Yun pointed to something glinting in the grass near one of the tents. "The communication equipment." Kehoe examined the radio device. It had been deliberately smashed, not accidentally dropped. Whatever had taken their friends was smart enough to prevent them from calling for help. "We need to find them," Da-Un said. "We need to be smart about it," Kehoe replied. "If we just go crashing through the forest, we'll end up captured too." He looked around the abandoned camp, his engineering mind automatically analyzing their situation. They were 3 students with minimal equipment, facing unknown creatures that had successfully captured a professor and 2 other students. The smart thing would be to try to escape and get help. But Kehoe's human instincts wouldn't let him abandon their friends. Instead, he began to plan. "We need a base of operations," he said finally. "Somewhere we can see what's happening but stay hidden ourselves." "Like what?" Crix asked. Kehoe looked up at the massive trees surrounding the camp. Most were too tall to climb easily, but one had thick, sturdy branches that started relatively low to the ground. "Like that," he said, pointing to the tree. "We build a watchtower." "A what?" Da-Un stared at him in confusion. "A raised observation platform," Kehoe explained. "From up there, we can see the entire area. We can track movement, plan rescue attempts, and call for help without being detected." "How do we build a tower in a tree?" Crix asked skeptically. Kehoe was already gathering rope and equipment from the abandoned camp. "Basic engineering principles. We use the tree's natural structure as our foundation and build up from there." The work was harder than he had expected. The lowest branches were still 12 feet off the ground, which meant they had to throw ropes over them and climb up hand over hand. Da-Un turned out to be surprisingly good at knot tying, while Crix's multiple arms made him excellent at holding things steady. As they worked, Kehoe explained his plan. "We need to create multiple levels. The bottom platform for supplies and equipment, the middle level for living space, the top level for observation and communication." "This is insane," Da-Un muttered as she tied another support rope. "We're building a treehouse while monsters hunt our friends." "We're creating a tactical advantage," Kehoe corrected. "Predators hunt on the ground. They don't expect prey to attack from above." It took most of the day to construct the basic framework. Using rope, salvaged tent material, and wooden branches, they created a sturdy platform about 20 feet up in the tree. Kehoe designed it like a small building, with walls for protection and gaps for observation. While they worked, they heard sounds from the forest around them. Heavy footsteps moving through the trees, always just out of sight. Sometimes, they heard voices in the distance, their missing friends calling out. But the voices never came from the same location twice. "They're being moved around," Kehoe realized. "Kept alive but constantly relocated so we can't find them." "Why keep them alive?" Crix asked nervously. Kehoe didn't answer, but he suspected. He knew. Predators often kept prey alive to ensure fresh meat. The thought made him work faster. By evening, they had completed the basic watchtower structure. From the top platform, they could see for kilometers in every direction. The view was both encouraging and terrifying. Encouraging because they could see 3 other camps scattered throughout the forest, the other research teams that the shuttle pilot had mentioned. All 3 were still active, with campfires, burning and people moving around. Terrifying because they could also see signs of the creatures that hunted the forest. Large shapes moved between the trees in coordinated patterns. Whatever these things were, they were organized and intelligent. "Count them," Kehoe said to Da-Un, who was watching through a pair of binoculars they had salvaged from the camp. "I see 6 distinct shapes," she reported. "Maybe more. They're moving in a pattern, like they're patrolling territory boundaries." Kehoe used the tent material to create improvised mirrors, angling them to reflect sunlight. By adjusting the angles, he could send simple signals to the other camps. "What are you doing?" Crix asked. "Trying to warn the other teams," Kehoe replied. "If I can get their attention, maybe I can signal them to be careful." His first attempts failed completely. The people in the distant camps didn't notice the reflected light signals. But Kehoe didn't give up. He repositioned the mirrors and tried different patterns until finally someone in the nearest camp began signaling back. "They see us," Da-Un said excitedly. Kehoe used simple light patterns to communicate basic messages. Danger, stay alert, watch for large predators. The responses he got back were confused but acknowledgeful. As night fell, they settled into their improvised shelter. Kehoe had designed the platform with 3-person shifts in mind, 1 person on watch while the others rested. From their elevated position, they could monitor the entire area without being detected. "Look," Da-Un whispered during her watch. "Shift." Kehoe climbed up to the observation level and looked where she was pointing. In the distance, they could see lights moving through the forest. Not campfires or electric lights, but something else entirely. The lights were too organized to be natural, too purposeful to be random. Bioluminescence, Kehoe realized. The creatures glow in the dark. They watched in fascination and horror as the lights moved through the forest in perfect formation. 6 distinct sources of light traveling together like a hunting pack. The lights paused near each of the research camps, circling them slowly before moving on. "They're scouting," Da-Un said. "Learning the locations and routines of each camp. Planning. Their attacks," Kehoe agreed grimly. As they watched, the lights changed direction and began moving toward their tree. Kehoe felt his heart racing as the glow grew brighter through the forest. "They know we're here," he whispered. The lights stopped just at the edge of their clearing. For several long minutes, nothing happened. Then a sound drifted up to them. Low, rumbling communication between the creatures. It wasn't quite language, but it was clearly organized sound with meaning. Finally, the lights moved away, continuing their patrol of the forest. But Kehoe knew they would be back. Whatever hunted, this forest had found them, studied them, and decided to wait. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "they'll come for all of us." Dawn came gray and misty, with heavy clouds blocking most of the sunlight. Kehoe had barely slept, spending most of the night watching for signs of movement in the forest below. Now, as pale light filtered through the leaves, he could see that something had changed during the darkness. "The other camps," Da-Un said from beside him, looking through the binoculars. "2 of them are gone." Kehoe took the binoculars and confirmed her observation. Where there had been 3 active research camps the night before, only 1 still showed signs of life. Thin smoke rose from a single campfire about 2 kilometers to the east. The other 2 locations showed no movement at all. "Taken during the night," he said grimly. "Just like our friends." Crix climbed up to join them on the observation platform. His antennae twitched nervously as he scanned the forest. How many people were in those camps? 6 or 7 in each group, Da-un replied. That means 15 to 20 people have been captured. Kehoe studied the remaining active camp through the binoculars. He could see figures moving around, apparently unaware that they were now the only research team left. They seemed to be preparing for another day of normal scientific work. We have to warn them, Da-un said. Kehoe was already adjusting his mirror signals, trying to catch the attention of the distant researchers. It took several minutes of flashing reflected sunlight before someone in the camp noticed and began responding. Using simple light patterns, Kehoe tried to communicate the urgent message. Danger. Others taken. Be ready. The responses he got back were confused but gradually became more alarmed as he repeated his warnings. At least they know something is wrong now, he said. But I don't think they really understand the scope of the threat. As if summoned by his words, movement began in the forest around the last remaining camp. Kehoe could see dark shapes moving between the trees, circling the research site like wolves surrounding prey. It's starting, he whispered. The attack was swift and coordinated. 6 massive creatures emerged from the forest simultaneously, approaching the camp from different directions. Through the binoculars, Kehoe could finally see their hunters clearly. They were unlike anything in the survey data. Each one stood nearly 8 feet tall, with muscular bodies covered in dark fur. Their heads were elongated like wolves, but their front limbs ended in hands with opposable thumbs. Most disturbing of all, they moved with obvious intelligence, using hand signals to coordinate their approach. Tool users, Da-un breathed. No wonder they could destroy the survey probes. The creatures didn't attack immediately. Instead, they began what could only be described as herding behavior. Working together, they drove the panicked researchers toward the center of their camp, cutting off escape routes and slowly tightening the circle. Kehoe watched helplessly as the scientists below tried to defend themselves. Some had emergency flares, others grabbed camp tools as weapons. But they were researchers, not fighters, and they had no idea how to work together against coordinated predators. Within minutes, it was over. The creatures had captured the entire research team without seriously injuring anyone. They began leading their prisoners away through the forest, disappearing into the thick trees just as they had with Professor Veltar's group. We're the only ones left, Crick said quietly. Kehoe lowered the binoculars, his mind racing. By his count, there were now more than 20 people captured by these creatures, all taken alive, all being held somewhere in this vast forest. The question was where and why. They're not eating them immediately, he said, thinking out loud. They're collecting them. For what? Da-un asked. Before Kehoe could answer, a sound drifted up from the forest below their tree. The same low, rumbling communication they had heard the night before, but this time it was much closer. The creatures had returned to their clearing. Kehoe motioned for silence and carefully peered. Down through the leaves, 6 pairs of glowing eyes stared back at him from the shadows below. The hunters had found their watchtower. For several long moments neither side moved. Kehoe could feel the intelligent gaze of the creatures studying their improvised shelter. These weren't mindless beasts. They were thinking, planning, evaluating the situation. Then one of the creatures stepped into the clearing, and Kehoe got his first close look at their enemy. It was even more impressive and terrifying up close. The creature's fur was mottled gray and black, perfect camouflage for the forest shadows. Its hands were equipped with retractable claws that could easily make the marks they had seen on the trees. Most unsettling of all were its eyes. They showed clear intelligence and something that looked almost like curiosity as it studied their tree fortress. The creature circled the base of their tree slowly, examining the rope supports and platform structure. It reached up and tested one of the support lines, pulling gently, as if determining how much weight it could hold. "It's trying to figure out how we built this," Da-Un whispered. The creature looked up at the sound of her voice, and Kehoe was shocked to see what might have been amusement in its expression. It made a series of low sounds to its companions, who emerged from the shadows to examine the tree as well. "They're impressed," Kehoe realized. "They didn't expect us to build something like this." The creatures spent nearly an hour investigating their watchtower. They tested the ropes, examined the construction joints, and even attempted to climb up several times before deciding the structure was too well designed to assault directly. Finally, the apparent leader of the pack looked up at Kehoe and made a series of deliberate sounds. The tone was unmistakably communicative, not quite language, but clearly an attempt to convey meaning. "I think it's trying to talk to us," Da-Un said in amazement. Kehoe leaned out from the platform and called, down in the most peaceful tone he could manage. "We don't want to fight you. We just want our friends back." The creature tilted its head at the sound of human speech, then made more of the rumbling sounds. After a moment, it pointed toward deeper parts of the forest, then back up at their tree. "It's telling us where our friends are," Crix interpreted, "and that we can stay here if we want, or it's trying to lure us down so it can capture us too," Da-Un countered. Kehoe studied the creature's body language carefully. Everything about its posture suggested confidence rather than aggression. It wasn't afraid of them, but it also didn't seem to view them as immediate prey. "I think," he said slowly, "we've earned their respect. The watchtower. They didn't expect prey that could build defensive structures." The creature made one final series of sounds, then turned and walked toward the forest. Its companions followed, but not before each one took another long look at the human's construction. "What just happened?" Crix asked, as the creatures disappeared into the trees. Kehoe watched the spot where they had vanished, his mind working furiously. "I think we just passed some kind of test. They wanted to see how we would react to being hunted." "And now?" Da-Un asked. "Now the real hunt begins," Kehoe replied. "But this time, we have an advantage they didn't expect." He patted the wooden platform beneath his feet. "They might be smart predators, but we're human engineers, and humans build things that last." For the rest of the day, Kehoe worked frantically to improve their watchtower defenses. The creature's visit had shown him that their current structure, while impressive, wouldn't be enough if the hunters decided to make a serious assault. "Help me with this," he said to Da-Un, dragging salvaged equipment up to the main platform. He had retrieved more rope, metal framework pieces from damaged tents, and every electronic device he could find in the abandoned camps. "What are you building now?" she asked. "A communications array," Kehoe replied, connecting wires between different devices. "If we can't physically rescue our friends, maybe we can call for help." The problem was range. Their basic radio equipment was designed for short-distance communication between research teams, not for reaching orbital stations. But Kehoe had noticed something during his engineering studies. Height dramatically improved signal transmission. "The watchtower gives us elevation," he explained as he worked. If I can boost the signal power and use the tree itself as an antenna, we might be able to reach the orbital station. Dae-Yoon helped him string wire up through the tree branches, creating an improvised antenna system that reached nearly 60 feet above the ground. Crix used his multiple arms to hold connections, steady while Kehoe soldered components together with an emergency repair tool. "This is either brilliant or completely insane," Crix commented as Kehoe connected the final wires. "With humans, those are often the same thing," Dae-Yoon replied. The first test was disappointing. Kehoe's improvised transmitter could reach about 50 kilometers, enough to contact other research teams if any had survived, but not nearly enough to reach orbit. "The power supply isn't strong enough," he muttered, studying his circuit diagrams. "I need more electrical current." "What about the emergency beacons?" Dae-Yoon suggested. "Each research team carried them." Kehoe's face lit up. Emergency beacons were designed to transmit distress signals across interplanetary distances. If he could modify them to carry voice data instead of just emergency codes, it took 3 hours to collect and modify the beacons from all the abandoned camps. Kehoe had to rewire their internal circuits completely, turning emergency transmitters into components of a larger communication system. When he was finished, the watchtower looked like it had grown electronic vines. "Testing signal strength," he announced, powering up the modified array. The response was immediate and overwhelming. His radio crackled with voices from across the moon's surface. Not just the orbital station, but mining facilities, research, ships, and even commercial vessels passing through the system. "Emergency signal detected," came a voice from orbit. "This is station control. Identify yourself and state the nature of your emergency." Kehoe grabbed the microphone with shaking hands. "This is Kehoe, human student from the Galactic Academic Research Expedition. We have multiple teams captured by hostile life forms on the forest moon surface." "Repeat that transmission," Station Control replied. "Did you say captured?" "Confirmed. At least 20 researchers have been taken by large, intelligent predators. We need immediate rescue operations." There was a long pause before Station Control responded. "Kehoe, our records show you were evacuated from the surface yesterday due to psychological distress. Are you certain about these reports?" Kehoe felt frustration boiling up inside him. Even now, even with clear evidence, they thought he was having mental problems. "I am certain. Professor Veltar and his remaining students were captured last night. 3 other research teams were taken this morning. We watched it happen." "Stand by for verification," came the reply. While he waited, Kehoe noticed that his transmission was being picked up by other stations across the system. He could hear voices discussing the situation, some believing his report, others expressing skepticism. Then a new voice came through the radio, familiar and angry. "Kehoe, this is Professor Veltar. Stop this ridiculous panic immediately." Kehoe stared at the radio in shock. "Professor? Where are you? Are you safe?" "I am perfectly safe in my research camp, conducting important scientific work. Your continued fear-mongering is disrupting legitimate research operations." "That's impossible," Dae-Yoon said, grabbing the microphone. "Professor, we saw you captured. Your camp was abandoned." "Nonsense," Veltar's voice replied. "I am looking at my camp right now. All students are present and accounted for." Kehoe felt cold understanding wash over him. He grabbed the binoculars and looked toward the area where Veltar's camp had been. There it was. Tents, campfire, and figures moving around. From this distance, it looked exactly like a normal research operation. "It's a fake," he breathed. "They're using our friends as bait." "What?" Crix asked. Kehoe studied the distant camp more carefully. The figures were moving, but their movements were wrong. Too slow, too mechanical. And the camp itself was in a slightly different location than it had been yesterday. "The creatures set up a false camp," he explained quickly. "They're making our friends act like everything is normal to prevent rescue operations." "Professor," Kehoe said into the microphone, "if you're really safe, answer this question. What did you call human instincts when we argued yesterday?" There was a long pause before Veltar's voice responded. I said they were appropriate for the situation." "No, you didn't," Kehoe said firmly. "You called them primitive paranoia. Whoever is speaking, you're not Professor Veltar." The radio went silent for several minutes. When it crackled back to life, Station Control was speaking. "Kehoe, we're reading some unusual energy signatures from the surface. Can you describe what you're seeing?" Kehoe quickly explained about the false camp, the captured researchers, and the intelligent predators. As he spoke, he could hear more voices joining the conversation. Other ships, other stations, all listening to his report. "If this is true," Station Control said slowly, "we have a first contact situation with a hostile intelligent species." "It's true," Dayun confirmed. "We have visual confirmation of tool use, coordinated hunting behavior, and now deception tactics." "Stand by," Station Control replied. "We're dispatching emergency response teams immediately." But Kehoe wasn't finished. His modified communications array could reach every station in the system, and he intended to use that capability. "All research teams on any world," he broadcast, "be advised that preliminary surveys may not detect intelligent predators. Implement defensive protocols immediately. All mining operations," he continued, "establish watch schedules and perimeter defenses. These creatures are smart enough to study your routines and plan attacks. All transport vessels maintain orbital distance until surface threats are confirmed neutralized." As Kehoe continued his system-wide warnings, he realized that his watchtower had become more than just a hiding place. It was now a command center, coordinating information and safety measures across multiple worlds. "Look," Da'un said, pointing toward the false camp in the distance. Through the binoculars, Kehoe could see that the facade was breaking down. The figures in the camp had stopped their mechanical movements, and several were looking up toward the sky as if they could hear the radio transmissions. "The rescue ships will be here soon," Crix said hopefully. Kehoe nodded, but he knew their situation was about to become much more dangerous. The creatures had lost their deception advantage, and they would know that help was coming. That meant they would have to act soon, before their prey could be rescued. "Get ready," he told his companions. "We've called for help, but now we have to survive long enough for it to arrive." The rescue fleet arrived 3 hours later, but Kehoe's work was far from finished. From his watchtower command post, he coordinated the entire operation using his modified communications array. "Rescue Team Alpha, this is Watchtower Base," he transmitted to the lead ship. "Be advised that the creatures use sophisticated deception tactics. The camp at coordinates 127.4 by 83.7 is a false setup using captured personnel as bait." "Understood, Watchtower Base," came the reply. "We're reading 6 large life forms surrounding that location. How do you recommend we proceed?" Kehoe studied the situation through his binoculars. The creatures had abandoned their deception completely. Now, and were moving their captives toward what looked like caves in a rocky outcropping. They moved with purpose, but without obvious panic, as if they had planned for this possibility. They're intelligent tool users, Kai-Ho advised. Approach with caution but not aggression. They haven't harmed their captives so far, which suggests they might be willing to negotiate. Negotiate with wild animals? Asked the rescue team leader skeptically. With a previously unknown intelligent species, Kehoe corrected firmly. These aren't animals. They've demonstrated planning, coordination, tool use, and deception capabilities. They're people. While the rescue teams established a perimeter around the creature's stronghold, Kehoe coordinated with 2 other emergency situations his warnings had revealed. A mining team on the moon's far side had discovered similar large predators near. Their operation and a research vessel had detected organized movement in forests on a neighboring world. "Watchtower Base, this is Mining Station 7, came a transmission. "The creatures here just approached our perimeter carrying what looks like a white flag made from plant material. They want to communicate." Kehoe smiled, despite the tension. "They're learning that humans respond to peaceful gestures. Try basic mathematical concepts, draw numbers in the dirt, show simple equations. If they really are intelligent, they'll recognize the patterns." For the next 2 hours, Kehoe served as communication coordinator between multiple first contact situations across the star system. His watchtower had become the hub for humanity's first organized interaction with a new intelligent species. The breakthrough came when Professor Veltar's voice crackled through the radio. His real voice this time. "Kehoe, this is Professor Veltar speaking freely. The creatures are releasing all captives. They want to establish formal communication with the rescue teams." "Are you injured, Professor?" Kehoe asked. "No, we're all fine. Frightened, but unharmed. The creatures, they were studying us, learning about our technology, our social structures, our reactions to stress. I believe this was some kind of intelligence assessment." "Assessment for what?" "To determine if we were worthy of contact," Veltar replied. "The elder creature has been trying to communicate complex concepts through drawings and gestures. They have a sophisticated civilization hidden in this forest." Down in the clearing below Kehoe's watchtower, something remarkable was happening. 3 of the large creatures emerged from the forest. But instead of the predatory stalking he had observed before, they moved with ceremonial dignity. One carried what looked like a staff decorated with metal and stones. Another held a collection of objects that might have been gifts or trade goods. The third creature looked up at Kehoe's watchtower and made a series of complex vocalizations. The sounds were clearly structured communication, though Kehoe couldn't understand the meaning. "I think they want to talk to you specifically," Dawan said. "You're the one who built this tower, who coordinated the rescue efforts." Kehoe climbed down from the watchtower slowly, keeping his movements peaceful and deliberate. When he reached the ground, the lead creature approached him directly. Up close, Kehoe could see intelligence in its eyes that rivaled any sentient species he had met. The creature extended one clawed hand, palm up, in what was clearly a gesture of greeting. Kehoe carefully placed his own hand over the creature's palm. The contact lasted only a moment, but it felt profoundly significant. Then the creature turned and gestured toward Kehoe's watchtower, making approving sounds. It was clearly expressing admiration for the construction. "Thank you," Kehoe said, knowing the creature couldn't understand his words, but hoping his tone would convey respect. The rescue operation concluded without violence. All captured researchers were released unharmed, though many reported being subjected to various tests and observations during their captivity. The creatures, it seemed, had been conducting their own research on the alien visitors to their world. 3 days later, Kehoe found himself in the orbital station's main conference room, facing a panel of high-ranking officials from across the galaxy. Instead of the disciplinary hearing he had expected, he was receiving commendations. The early warning system you established prevented similar incidents on 4 other worlds, announced the Galactic Exploration Council chairwoman. Your communication protocols are being adopted as standard procedure for first contact situations. Professor Veltar, who sat at the far end of the table, had the grace to look embarrassed. I owe Kehoe and Da-Un a formal apology, he said. Their human instincts, as I unfortunately called them, saved many lives, including my own. Those instincts have a name, Kehoe replied calmly. They're called responsibility and protection of others. All intelligent species should share them. The council chairwoman smiled. Which brings us to our offer, Kehoe. The Galactic Exploration Safety Division would like you to join their team as Chief of Emergency Protocols. Your experience with hostile first contact situations would be invaluable. Kehoe considered the offer carefully. It would mean leaving his engineering studies, but it would also mean ensuring that future research teams would never be abandoned as he and his friends had been. I accept, he said, on one condition. Da-Un comes with me as Chief Xenobiology Advisor, and I want the authority to establish permanent safety stations on any world where research teams are active. Agreed, the chairwoman said immediately. 6 months later, Kehoe stood on the observation deck of his first permanent safety station. Built on the forest moon where it all began, the station incorporated the design principles he had developed in his original watchtower. Advanced sensors monitored the surrounding forest. Communication arrays maintained contact with 17 different species, and emergency response teams stood ready to assist anyone in need. The creatures of the forest, who called themselves the Kethamori, had become valued partners in the station's operations. They served as guides for research teams and shared their extensive knowledge of the forest ecosystem. In return, they gained access to galactic communication networks and trade opportunities. Da-Un approached him carrying a datapad filled with the day's reports. 3 successful research expeditions completed, 2 minor medical emergencies handled, and the Keth Mori want to discuss expanding cultural exchange programs. Any problems? Kehoe asked. Just one, she replied with a smile. The junior researchers keep asking if they can build their own watchtowers. Apparently, it's become a popular hobby among human students. Kehoe looked out at the forest, where his original watchtower still stood, now preserved as a monument to first contact. The simple wooden platform had grown into something much larger, a symbol of humanity's refusal to abandon others in need. Let them build, he said. The galaxy is a dangerous place. Everyone should know how to protect themselves and others. In the distance, a Keth Mori patrol passed by the station, exchanging friendly gestures with the human researchers they encountered. What had begun as a hunt had evolved into friendship, and what had started as a desperate survival shelter had become a beacon of safety for all intelligent life. Kehoe smiled and returned to his work. There were more worlds to explore, more species to meet, and more safety stations to build. Somewhere out there, another research team might need help, and he intended to make sure they would never face danger alone. That, after all, was what humans did best.